I spent years telling myself I was being patient, strategic, smart. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right conditions to finally make the move I knew I needed to make. But here's what I was actually doing. I was hiding. I wrapped my fear in logic, dressed my hesitation up as wisdom, and called my paralysis a plan. And the worst part? I knew it. Somewhere underneath every excuse, I knew exactly what I was doing. Most men do. You don't need someone to hand you a mirror. You need someone to tell you to stop fogging it up. This is the list you won't want to hear. 6 lies men tell themselves, not because they're weak, but because the truth requires something most people aren't willing to give. And that's the thing about excuses. They don't feel like lies, they feel like reasons. This is the most dangerous lie a man can carry because it sounds responsible. It sounds measured. Machiavelli understood that the man who waits for perfect conditions is the man who never acts at all. Fortune favors the one who moves, not the one who plans to move eventually. The right time is a phantom. It shifts every time you approach it. When you were 30, the right time was after the kids were older. When they were older, the right time was after you were more stable. Now you're stable, and the right time is after you figure out the details. But here's what no one tells you. The details never resolve. The gap between where you are and where you want to be doesn't close with planning, it closes with motion. Every man who ever built something worth remembering started before he was ready. That's not recklessness, that's clarity. This lie has a specific target. It goes after the man who let a decade pass and now believes that decade disqualifies him from starting. Machiavelli wrote about men who mistook the passage of time for the closing of doors, who assumed that because a season had ended, so had their relevance. But history remembers men who began in the second act, not the first. The ones who showed up late and outworked everyone who arrived on time. Too late assumes that the value of what you're building depends on how many years you get to keep it. It doesn't. The value is in the building itself, in becoming the kind of man who refuses to let a calendar dictate what he's allowed to attempt. And here's where this gets uncomfortable. Most men who say, "It's too late," aren't mourning lost time. They're avoiding present effort. The lie isn't about the past. It's about today. If you're counting which ones apply to you, subscribe and tell me which one in the comments. We're not done yet. This is the lie that locks the door and throws away the key. One attempt, one failure. And suddenly that failure becomes a permanent verdict on whether the thing was ever possible. Machiavelli observed that the greatest leaders failed publicly and repeatedly before they ever succeeded, and that the men who remembered those failures longest were always the ones who never tried again. A man who tried once and stopped didn't gather evidence. He gathered an excuse. There is a critical difference between a man who failed and a man who quit. The man who failed can point to what went wrong, adjust, and attack it again from a different angle. The man who quit can only point to the result and say it proved him right. But one failed attempt proves nothing, except that one approach didn't work at that time under those conditions. It is not a prophecy. It is not a verdict. And carrying it like one is not wisdom. It is surrender wearing a mask. Responsibility is real. No one is denying that. But Machiavelli drew a sharp line between the man who carries obligations and the man who hides behind them. The plate is full. That part is true. What's false is the conclusion that a full plate means nothing else can begin. Every man who built something of consequence did it while carrying weight. The difference is that he stopped pretending the weight was the reason he couldn't move. He moved anyway and brought it with him. This lie works because it has a built-in shield. It makes you sound selfless, sacrificial, like a man doing his duty. But underneath that noble surface is a man who is terrified of adding one more thing that might not work. The obligations are real. The impossibility is invented. And the longer you confuse the two, the more convinced you become that standing still is the same as standing firm. This might be the most quietly destructive lie on this list because it doesn't attack what you do. It attacks who you believe you are. I'm not the type to start a business. I'm not the kind of man who speaks up. That's not who I am. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. It is the language of a man who has been shaped by other people's expectations for so long that he has mistaken their boundaries for his identity. The man who says, "I'm not that kind of person," has decided that who he has been is all he is allowed to become. But identity is not a fixed point. It is a direction, and the version of yourself you keep referencing, the one who couldn't, who wouldn't, who wasn't built for it, that man is behind you. He does not get to make decisions for the one standing here now. The most dangerous prison is the one where you are both the inmate and the guard. Machiavelli had no patience for men who measured themselves against the mediocre and called it enough. This final lie is the most comfortable and therefore the most corrosive. It works by comparison, by finding someone worse off and using their failure as proof of your progress. But progress measured against someone else's collapse is not progress. It is camouflage. The man who says, "At least I'm doing better than most," has stopped competing with his own potential and started competing with the lowest bar he can find. And here's the part that stings. Most men who say this know exactly what they're doing. They know the comparison is hollow. They know that better than most and anywhere close to what I'm capable of are two completely different measurements. But the first one lets them sleep at night, and the second one would require them to wake up and do something about it. These 6 lies don't announce themselves as lies, and that is precisely what makes them so effective. They arrive dressed as patience, as realism, as responsibility, as humility, and they settle so deeply into the way you think that you stop questioning whether they belong there at all. Every one of them exists for the same reason, which is to keep you comfortable enough to stay exactly where you are, and the cost of that comfort is measured not in what you lose, but in what you never allow yourself to attempt in the first place. The man who cuts off his own excuses does not suddenly become fearless or reckless or immune to doubt. He simply refuses to let the doubt speak louder than the decision, and that single shift changes everything that follows, because it means the next move belongs to him and not to the story he has been telling himself about why he cannot make it. You already know which of these 6 you carry, and you have known for longer than you are willing to admit, and the only question that remains is whether you are finally willing to set it down. You already know what you are. Finally, ruthless.